Okay, well, you've got me back on the mic. Vin's decided that he needs to devote his attention to a bottle of vino and his poor injured wife. Vin, our heart really goes out to you there, mate. No, seriously, to your wife, please send our respects. That was Bjork, Human Behaviour, and before that we had the fabulous Lada and John. I hope that they'll be coming back as regular contributors to TNS in the future. They both sound quite eager. I hope you'll agree with me that was quite a professional presentation. If you can just give me a nod that my levels are okay in the chat box there, anybody listening. And seeing as you're all busy debating with me some of the science that was behind Lana's assertions there, I'm going to kind of just tangent off on where the science is that backs this up. A lot of you may have been reading my comments in the chat box that black holes and the theory of the Big Bang are essentially bunk. The concept, just to clarify on this point, the event horizon, it's stated by black hole and Big Bang theory that as you approach the event horizon, as you approach the point of maximum density, that time essentially comes to a standstill. Well, this is all well and good, but unfortunately, if you try to conceive of an event that transects time 0 to time 1 is the easiest way of conceiving of it. So going from no time to time, essentially they complicate this by thinking about it backwards, as if you're going from time to no time as you approach the black hole, or as you approach the moment of Big Bang. Well, essentially, you couldn't approach time from no time. You would get no closer. If you're in no time, you move to nowhere, time-wise. So there is no way of transecting time as a boundary in that respect. So that essentially makes a nonsense of the entire concept of the Big Bang and of black holes. I'm not suggesting that there aren't huge areas of the galaxy and the universe that may be filled with such vast masses that you begin to see space being more or less twisted and... Michael, shut up, please. Yes, so you would have essentially twisted into something approaching a donut shape, where essentially there would be no middle. Again, it's very difficult to wrap your head around some of these shapes, because essentially what you're talking about with a donut shape is a torus, and a torus is what's known as a hyperdimensional sphere. So if you can imagine a ball and then imply an extra dimension that you cannot see, then you end up with a torus, you end up with a donut. And it's essentially... Who's the speaker, please? I'm not a speaker, sir. It's me, freemanjack. I've had to take over for Vin. His wife has broken his wrist. That was Laurie. That was... Lana. Sorry, my mistake. Get it together in the bloody chat box, boys. You're distracting me. Keep on topic. So essentially we write off the concept of black holes, but we keep the areas of spatial gravitational depression that give us all of the results that we see from black holes, the lensing of stars, when a black hole-like object passes in front of another star, then we can actually see 4 versions of the star as the light is bent around the massive spatial object. Again, it's possibly a bit picky to say, well, there's no such thing as a black hole, because there are essentially things that are resembling black holes that are black hole-like all over the galaxy, so all over the universe even. So it would probably be foolish to dispute some of the mathematics there. But the problem comes where you start to talk about an event horizon. Now, again, if you actually apply the idea of hyperspace to the hyperdimensional sphere, which becomes a torus, the magical thing about a torus is that it allows for energy to pass in a straight line through a hyperdimension. and as energy passes in a straight line through the hyperdimension, it describes a perfect spiral, and that spiral travels in a circular path which describes the torus, the donut shape. So it would be possible to be caught up in a very similar way to the way that being caught by a black hole is described by conventional science, and be essentially perpetually propelled around this eternal kind of spiral around the donut, around this very dense area of space. But it's just as likely that you would be bounced off, or taken. If you were to hit it tangentially, you may well be accelerated and flung off in a completely different direction rather than being sucked in as such. So we have a gravitational mass at the centre of the galaxy, which is the coalescent force, around which the galaxy has condensed out of its cloud of gas. We might as well call that object a supermassive black hole. That's the current model in science. Like I say, it could be potentially a little picky, questioning about the actual nature of black holes, because they are such extreme objects that it is probably possibly even beyond our abilities to consider their true nature. Bearing in mind that as well, there is again science that backs this up. There are certain black hole-like objects that eject plasma jets from their toroidal centre, and these plasma jets are in fact most likely being thrown off in exactly the manner that I was just describing, where particles and matter are drawn in by this huge gravitational source, lensed by the donut, and then ejected along the common centre of the donut. So you have black holes ejecting as much matter into space as they are consuming. So it's hard to say where the boundary lies there. But essentially, we have this huge gravitational mass at the centre of our galaxy, around which all of the stars coalesce. They form a ball at the centre of the galaxy around this, the galactic centre. I believe it's about 1/10 of the overall diameter of the galaxy. I could stand to be corrected there. And the galactic disk then spreads out along a galactic equator. This is caused by the rotation of the central body of the galaxy around its supermassive black hole, and that this rotation causes the galaxy to flatten out into a disk with the two traditional spiral arm shapes. Now, essentially, people are saying that the galactic equator, the galactic horizon, is an event that's simply a matter of our observational stance on Earth. I also believed that for quite some time, but I've actually found more evidence now that's stacking up to say that the solar system itself has an ecliptic path, that is a path that's at a tangent to its direction in its rotation around the galaxy. If you consider the solar system's rotation in our part of the spiral arm as a circular orbit, then on that circular orbit we have another circular orbit, that the solar system doesn't remain static on that orbit. It actually cycles around a common centre line, probably still being slowly tamed by this same force that creates the disk in the first place, and that the solar system hasn't quite settled down into a central plane yet. It cycles above and below the central plane. Now, on this cyclic path, we cross over the galactic horizon approximately every 11 or 12,000 years. This is, funnily enough, borne out by the swapping of the poles in approximately the same frequency, and this is measured by the north and south poles being shown to having swapped places approximately every 11,000 years in the volcanic record on the mid-Atlantic rift. So essentially, what we're possibly seeing there is that if you can imagine the galaxy as this huge rotating mass with a gravitational disk, where the maximum star density is primarily along the disk plane, and that we cross from away from that plane, across the disk, across the plane, and back away from the plane again on a 24,000 year cycle. Now this means that every 11,000 years or so, every 11 or 12,000 years or so, we cross from what I would like to describe as clockwise space into anti-clockwise space. As we cross the equatorial, the galactic equatorial region, that the spin of the subspace of the ether is reversed. That if you look into the actions of force fields in the presence of a toroidal magnet, you will see that the energy fields are lensed by the toroidal field and are sucked into a narrow band in the centre and are drawn, much like the Earth's magnetic field, into a huge donut shape again. Now, because of the rotation of the galaxy, we possibly have two donuts where you have an above and below because of this centre line, which would essentially mean that they would be counter-rotating toroidal energy fields, which would squash all of the high-energy particles gushing about in the universe into a narrow band, which would occupy, again, this equatorial region and also the ejector region, which would be at the sort of polar line running through the galaxy, where there's probably as much material being ejected out from the centre of the galaxy as there is being absorbed in at the regions. So essentially we have this huge rotating mass of which we are crossing over a line of force and changing from a direction of force that had a particular direction of rotation to the subspace. It's my belief that we're actually going through an intermediate period of space, much like when you travel from the North Pole to the South Pole, the Coriolis effect at the equator becomes indeterminate. So that's the effect that makes the water spin a particular way down your plug hole. When you try that at the equator, you've only got to impart a small amount of spin in the other direction, and you'll see that it goes down quite happily, go the other way around. I'm very sorry, Paddy. Are you struggling to keep up? Would you like me to simplify a little? It's very difficult with these sort of subjects. If there's one part that you particularly don't understand, please ask, and I'll quite happily explain in as simplistic language as possible. But with these subjects, they're very, very dense, and the considerations are quite sort of broad-reaching. So it's very hard to kind of stay within layman's language and express it in any kind of meaningful sense in any meaningful time. So essentially what we have is this intermediate area of space that we're travelling through at the moment, which is indicated by the pole shifts that we're seeing at the moment and the intermittent appearance of north and south poles in the wrong hemisphere. Currently there are dozens of fairly large areas of the north and south hemisphere that have exactly the wrong polar alignment. So if you're travelling through that region on a ship, if you're not using GPS, if you're using the old compass, the compass will swing and point the opposite way as you travel across that bit of the ocean. Many of the runways around the world have had to be renumbered because they're numbered in their number of degrees from north. And several major runways of international airports now have had to be completely renumbered recently because of the polar shift, the polar drift is running at an extreme rate. I think we've actually seen something like a 40 mile shift in the last decade, which is pretty unprecedented in human history. And like I say, these north and south poles are popping up all over the place. But like I say, this is all natural. You know what I mean? We've been around for 4 billion years. We're going to be around through this cycle. We're going to be around through several million more cycles like this, no doubt. So this isn't anything to be particularly worried about, and especially in this day and age with things like GPS positioning, where our international transport is no longer reliant on the magnetic compass. The polar reversal may in fact almost completely unaffect us. A bit like the millennium bug, Y2K issue, that on paper it all looked very hideous and very scary, but I don't actually remember any planes falling out of the sky or any bank computers crashing and being incapable of restarting and losing everybody's money on January the 1st, 2000. So, there's a lot of fear-mongering about, and I think that we all need to be very careful of anything that falls into the fear agenda. I think that most fear agendas are driven by intentions that perhaps aren't in our best interest. Right, I'm going to whack a tune on. This is Portishead Glory Box. Grab a cup of tea, because my cup's empty. Throw a couple of skins together. And if anybody's got any questions on what I've already said, chuck them in the chat box while I'm away. And I'll try and take it from here when I come back. We're going into quantum entanglement and how astrology can possibly be a real scientific effect. But you'll have to wait for a minute for that one, because my throat's dry. Portishead. I do love Glory Box. Right, okay. And just a little thing somebody put in the chat box. That Eskimos would be knackered by the polar reversal, but that would assume that Eskimos had only been in the Arctic regions for less than 11,000 years. And certainly my take on current human archaeology is pushing the frontier of human inhabitation and civilization around the planet back a lot further than that. The Vedas point to at least 40,000 years, and certainly there's evidence of high civilization being around at least 9,500 BC, according to Graham Hancock's calculations. So it would appear that there was certainly a widespread human civilization covering the planet before the end of the Ice Age, which is approximately 11,000 years ago. Again, we seem to have a lot of these kind of 10, 11,000 year intervals here. There's certainly something being pointed to there. Right, okay, so let's go one step further. What is matter? I mean, this is one of the fundamentals where I think that most of the mistakes are being generated from. That the stuff and substance of matter, the more we peer into it, the less substantial it becomes. The more ethereal or aethereal pertaining to the ether. And that's basically where I'm going to go now. I mean, it would be possible to pursue this like the under the giant's fingernail theory until it disappeared up its own backside. I know that plenty of people could pursue the question of, all right, then, okay, so what is the ether? Well, I'm sorry, but I'm going down to subatomic particles below the size of the proton and the neutron to the pointillescent spots of space that are so infinitesimally small that it's almost becoming pointless to conceive of anything smaller. Right, okay, so essentially what we have is, if you vibrate a sphere of liquid, and if we consider the ether as some kind of superfluid, then what the shape that will form from a perfect sphere being resonated at a particular pitch will be the star tetrahedron, which is two interlocked triangular equilateral triangle based pyramids, pointed tip through the base and base through the tip. Essentially these would be the nodal lines, the harmonic nodal lines, where the amplifying and defeating nature of interference patterns will leave a quiet spot in the fluid, and because of the nature of the vibration coming in from all sides, this causes, like I say, this star tetrahedron. Well, this star tetrahedron is a very interesting shape when you start to look into it, and essentially it underlies the fundamental shape of nature. This can be understood most easily by looking into some of the ideas held within sacred geometry, which state that you start from a point. So you consider a point, and a point is no space, that contains nothing. It merely describes an area, a place, a start point, I suppose. You then move out to 2 points, at which point you can draw a line, and these 2 points are still not space. You can't contain space within a line. When you get to 3 points, suddenly we have a triangle, and from a triangle you can contain space, but you can only contain two-dimensional space, still not stuff and substance. In order to make three-dimensional space, you need to have a fourth point, and this fourth point is placed equilaterally from the other 3 points and makes up a tetrahedron, a 3-pointed pyramid on all sides. So it has a equilateral triangle as a base, an equilateral triangle as each of its sides. Now, this now is the primary, most economic way of the universe containing three-dimensional space. But the trouble is that this doesn't allow for any sort of a wave function. There's no way of this space interacting with anything. It would just be dead. It would be a dead matrix. There would be no evolution. There would be no movement. It would be a fixed object. So you need a second tetrahedron, and the second tetrahedron needs to be placed in perfect opposite geometric polarity with the first one. So when you insert the second tetrahedron through the first, you end up with the star tetrahedron. Now, if you consider the one of the tetrahedrons to be a positive and one to be a negative, or one to be a hot and one to be a cold, whichever waveform you wish to describe, the polar opposites will be contained within those tetrahedrons. Now, if you were to make a tetrahedron out of, if it was conceivably possible, one end each tetrahedron out of a bar magnet, so one tetrahedron was a north pole and one was a south pole, or if you could possibly insert 2 crystals through each other with the electrical properties being excluded from each other, then if you were to bang the top of that crystal star tetrahedron with a hammer, you would have a huge toroidal energy field flash out, probably even so much as giving a flash of light. Again, we have this torus, the shape of the magnetic or electromagnetic field that would be emitted from 2 polar opposite tetrahedrons inserted through each other as a star tetrahedron would be toroidal in nature and would be emitted from the centre of the tetrahedron. So we have three-dimensional space conscribed within the 2 tetrahedrons within the star tetrahedron, and that star tetrahedron has the ability to describe the three-dimensional space, including the ability to have a wave function. Now, the importance of this wave function is that if you now draw this star tetrahedron as a matrix, as a grid, out in all dimensions, so you attach a star tetrahedron to another star tetrahedron, then more and more and more in all directions. So if you had one in your hand, you would stick one on the top, one on the bottom, one on the left, one on the right, one on the front, one on the back, and build out into space a lattice work of star tetrahedrons, because any way that you vibrate the ether, you end up with this shape, and within that shape it's a fractal shape. So within each arm of the tetrahedron there's a further tetrahedron described, and the vibration, the nodal pattern of the tetrahedron is repeated within each of its fractal parts. So you build out this three-dimensional grid that you let's describe it as a matrix, because that's probably the most appropriate term for it. In this matrix made up of star tetrahedrons, if we were to take a little glass hammer and ping one of these tetrahedrons, it would radiate a toroidal energy field out through the... Imagine them like the coil springs of a sprung bed when you've taken all the cloth off. Imagine them all connected sort of arm to arm, like a bunch of protesters or something, and you kick one of the protesters at one end and a ripple goes through the protesters before the one at the far end comes around and kicks you back up the arse. Okay, so essentially we have this bed spring matrix. If you ping one of the springs, this toroidal energy field emanates from the centre point of that tetrahedron, that star tetrahedron, and you have a single note. If you ping two of the mattress springs, you have two toroidal energy fields approaching each other through the matrix, and when they interact, you end up with interference patterns again. Now, these interference patterns, while being generated by a star tetrahedron, because of their toroidal, circular, curved nature, will interact in very, very strange and peculiar ways. And anybody that's experimented with a wave tank slit experiments and seen some of the interference patterns that can clearly be seen just by simply using the surface of a tank of water and some cardboard with slots cut out of it. So essentially we have, if you can imagine the entire universe being constructed of this star tetrahedral matrix, and that all points of it are being pinged, that when these energy fields combine in a strong enough point, they ping another thing. And so what we have is this vast three-dimensional, possibly multi-dimensional, possibly hyperdimensional field of interacting toroidal energy fields, creating these interference patterns. And when you study these interference patterns and extrapolate out what you're seeing in 2 dimensions, or two-ish dimensions on the surface of a plane of water, to an action going off in all directions from a central field, then you begin to get the enough interference patterns to start to describe everything in nature. Curves, curves are a natural... energy travels in straight lines, but nothing else does in the universe, so curves are kind of a natural resultant of the distortion in space-time. Just simply imagine swirling a joss stick or a sparkler around in the mid-air at night. If you spin it and move it through the air at the same time, then you can be drawing a straight line, and yet through space it will appear to be a curve. That's just sometimes you have to extrapolate out to an additional layer of implied complexification, that sometimes these things aren't so easy to grasp within the normal realms of three-dimensional considerations, and that we often, when thinking about dimensions, have to add implied dimensions, or reduce our consideration of the dimensions that we are looking at by a factor of 1 in complexity, in order to then be able to imagine the implied dimension. It's quite tricky. Thank you, Paddy. You get it now. I could give you an easy example of this. If you look at most conifers, if you imagine your star tetrahedron and imagine it rotating through space as it projects itself out through the Earth, and you have the morphogenetic field of a conifer. A conifer is the shadow as described by a star tetrahedral force field basically springing up out of the ground. Yes, Pondy, interaction between opposite charges, but again, charge is possibly a bit of a misnomer that we're... bloody hell, what have I done with my lighter? Oh no, I've lost my lighter. Bugger. And I've lost my thread. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put a tune on, because this is all very deep and very dark and quite hard to wrap your head around, and I need to clear my thoughts. Let's see what we've got here. What do you fancy? Do you fancy something regular, or do you fancy something out of my selection? Yeah, the tree does grow into the electrical. Well, yeah, the electrical paths. Yeah. I kind of see bioenergetic rather than electrical myself. I'm a big follower of Sheldrake and the morphogenetic field theory, which suggests that there is actually a bioenergetic field as described by Reich with orgone, and as assumed to be a fact with the chi energies of Eastern philosophies, and is basically just a life force that expresses itself through the resonant frequencies in the shape of a human or a tree or a rabbit or dog or whatever, and that we as cells, as a cellular organised creature made up of small components, organise ourselves within this predetermined morphogenetic field, and that he links a lot of ill health to people not realising the shape of their morphogenetic field and responding appropriately to its changing dynamic nature. I'm not seeing anything here that I really fancy. Oh no, it's just too bloody bad quality. That's a shame. Oh, bloody hell. I hate it when this happens. Right, okay. How small are the components? Well, they would be discrete, wouldn't they? I would suggest that they actually go on a fractal level down to the infinitesimally small and the extraordinarily large. That there is no the smallest point in the universe, and there is no largest point in the universe, and NASA's own work at measuring the edge of the universe has held up that the universe is essentially holographic in nature. That's not to say that it's illusory, but that in every part of the universe the information is carried to make a whole universe. We could even go into hyperdimensional pinch points. Right, okay, let's just have a scroll back up through this chat. Right, okay, Paddy, let's go back to basics then. Alright, so if you grasp the... Charlie. If you grasp this interfering energy pattern, if you imagine them like waves on a pond and you drop two stones into the pond, where the ripples of the two circular rings coming out from the two stones interact, you end up with something called an interference pattern. Now what happens is when the peak of a wave meets the peak of a wave coming from the other stone, you end up with an amplified peak, which is twice as high as the two baseline peaks. And the same way, when you have two troughs of a wave colliding, then you have a double dip trough. Now, these form perfectly symmetrical grid patterns on the surface of the water. Now, what I'm suggesting is that when these patterns, if you were to think of them as three-dimensional patterns emitting in all directions rather than just along the flat surface of water, then basically what you have is the shapes emerging that we see as matter. So what we perceive as matter is simply an interference grid of interacting electromagnetic toroidal energy waves, and that through the fractal nature of the universe expanding, possibly, I mean, saying that it's expanding is a wrong thinking about it, because it can't expand because it has nothing to expand into. So what we have is a rolling universe, a toroidal universe, where time and matter is constantly recycled and would appear to the observer as constantly travelling outwards, but that's because we can't observe the hyperdimensions where it's then returning back. So essentially we have these interacting interference patterns, and where we see the high peaks and the high troughs, the amplified interference patterns, which would then rise. If you were looking across the surface of the water, you would see these as grand peaks. These would be twice as high as the ripples that surround them. So you would have a little point of excess energy yeah, or in the negative of negative energy, just in that spot. If the two stones, rather than being dropped into the water, are vibrated up and down in the water at a regular rate, then these can become standing waves, where essentially the wave is constantly supported by the movement of energy in towards the centre, and again either produces a peak or a trough, but in essence an area of raised or lowered energetic state. If you again extrapolate this out into the three-dimensional consideration that you have to place upon this, then those points would essentially be little nuggets of energy, little high spots energetically in the three-dimensional space. So if you imagine a cube, say, like a dice, like the shape of a dice, and if you were to shake the outside of the cube, the energy that you imparted into the cube from all directions would meet at points by the generation of these standing waves in the air, or whatever you want to consider the fluid within the cube, and these would become essentially concentrated points of energy, and this is what we know as the subatomic particles. So protons will be little high points on the waveform, and neutrons will be little low points on the waveform, and that all of these points of energy are in a constant dance around each other because of the nature that the density of space-time creates with attraction and repulsion. That anything that's in an attractive relationship or a repulsive relationship tends to impart spin. Again, all of the scientists, when you start asking about toroidal space, they all kind of shrug their shoulders. They know that everything spins, and it spins pretty much forever, but nobody can quite explain why. And this, again, this would be explained by this toroidal universe, where the multiverse that the multi-dimensional universe that we exist in is mirrored by a hyperdimensional universe working in reverse, unseen, because we can't see beyond that realm of dimension. So again, I mean, and this is known. There are, for anybody that doesn't know, there's anti-atoms and anti-particles. When they're doing fusion reactions, they actually rely on the creation of antiparticles, and it's the collision of these two, the fusion, the joining together of a particle and an antiparticle, that we take the energy from. And fusion reactors are working. They're the opposite of fission reactors. They're not atomic reactors where you bring two atomic sources together and create heat. These literally reunite the fundamental particles of the universe in a collision that creates an enormous output of heat for almost no input of stuff. You basically disassemble the stuff that you drop in there and turn it into raw energy. Fascinating science. I doubt very much if they'll ever get it to work particularly stably. I think the nature of the universe is just too chaotic to allow for a stable fusion reaction to provide power, but that's my own belief system. I try not to put that on. Thank you, Paddy. I'm glad that you think this stuff's incredible. I've thought this stuff has been incredible since I read Einstein at the age of 11, and have just been completely blown away by it ever since. I had great fun over New Year's Eve. I have a friend who's was at least a real rational fundamentalist scientist that studied astronomy since age 12, but hadn't quite I told me it. Gnosis, mate. Logic. Apply logic. Read the stories. They're just stories. Read the stories and read them as stories rather than as fact. And this all comes to you. Nassim Haramein is certainly the one who gave me the star tetrahedron bit. If anybody wants to really have their brains blown, go for Nassim Haramein. I think that may actually be called Event Horizon, but anyway, yeah, he's got a huge library of online stuff that just is incredible. Thank you, Paddy. Well, no, there are no complete morons, mate. I came through a fucking hideously over-packed modern comprehensive school in the middle of Essex, where we were designed basically to be factory fodder or cannon fodder. So, you know what I mean, work at Ford's or go and get shot at was the option when it came to work careers day at my school. I came out of it with no education from school whatsoever, but I damn well educated myself. I wasn't taking that for a dose of life. So, just keep learning, people. You know, it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to consider what you previously thought was inconceivable, and it's never too late either to reconsider deeply held beliefs. This is where I was just going with the Westy story, that essentially I broke this to Westy in probably what was a 4 or a 6 hour conversation when we were both completely out of our heads on New Year's Eve. And he left the party that day fundamentally convinced that his belief in black holes and the Big Bang that he had held since a very early age was as bunk as what I said, and went away with an entire new grasp of the possibilities of physics that instead of detracting from the beauty and the majesty of the universe, in fact only increase it. This stuff doesn't do anything to remove any of the fascination of, like people were pointing out, the spirals that are in a sunflower seed, or the chaotic shape of a broccoli head, or, you know what I mean. These are all essentially complexities of a fractal geometrical universe, and I suppose that's where I need to go. So essentially, Paddy, are you happy that the structure of atoms is essentially no more or less than the three-dimensional splash pattern of energies being dropped into a sea of star tetrahedron-shaped coil springs of a vast three-dimensional bed? This is the thing, you see, there is no expansion in the universe. The universe has nothing to expand into. It just is. There is no outside. Uni means all. Yeah, so there is no outside. This is it. There may be more of this than we know at the moment, but it's more than likely going to be hyperdimensional. So the outside is going to be of a different order to that of the inside. But anyway, that's kind of going off topic. Essentially, the universe is seen as expanding, not because it's expanding, but it's reducing in energy and increasing in complexity. There is the idea of entropy is that things go from hot to cold and not the other way. That energy goes from usable to obsolete. Well, my suggestion is that with this toroidal universe, that would actually be bunk, and the energy simply goes from positively polarised to negatively polarised, and it exchanges field energy, torsion energy in the conversion, and that's probably what drives most of these magnet motors and supposed over unity engines that we're seeing in the free energy field. I doubted all of those a few years ago, but I've been looking very carefully into some of those, and it would appear that many of them are harnessing some kind of torsion field, and they're not using energy from anything else. I have my concerns about the amount of energy that's going to go to produce that many neodymium magnets, that they're going to be any sort of real saviour for the planet, but it certainly makes some very interesting science. As to the planets separating, anybody seen the shrinking Earth theory, or the expanding Earth theory? Again, I would have issues with the consideration of time-space in that, but certainly it's a very clever bit of kind of logical extrapolation. Some chap has basically done away with subduction in tectonic plates and then run the clock back, removing all of the expansion activity. So like the mid-Atlantic ridge, where that produces new material each year, if you wind that back like re-zipping the zipper, basically all the continents all slowly slot into place, leaving the planet about half the size that it is currently. And if you do the same to Mars, along the huge rift valley that you can see like a huge scar on Mars, using the NASA surface data, the terrain data, and just simply remove each layer of terrain data one at a time from the picture, you again see this huge, makes the Grand Canyon look like a mere scratch. Huge geological feature basically re-zip itself, and this would suggest that the planets are quite literally growing. Again, you see, it's entirely possible that the action of time-space is so complex that it's almost impossible to really factor in. All right, now I'm going to have to go. Let me go for another bloody tune here, because if I want to go into the warping of time-space and how brain twisting it is to even start thinking about these subjects, I'm going to have to draw a moment's concentration. What have we got here? Okay, so toroidal space. Right. Okay. How can I describe? All right. Okay. Time is relative to speed and density. Just to explain, this is the basis of the fundamental principle at the basis of Einstein's E equals mc squared, which simply put means that energy multiplied by the speed of light equals matter squared. Okay, so basically if you take a lump of matter and square it, then the resultant energy will be E times the speed of light squared. I may be slightly wrong with those maths, but that's basically it's an equation that comes out with very big numbers, which is why a small amount of plutonium makes a very big fucking bang when you liberate all of the energy contained within it. Right, okay. Somebody asked earlier, I think it was Paddy again, how small a particle are we thinking of here? Okay, well let's think first of all of an atom. Okay. An atom is essentially equidistant between a planet and a sun. Okay, so an atom is the same proportions as the sun is to the Earth and the Earth is to an atom. So we're looking at quite relativistic proportions here. And that if we were to take a picture, could we take a picture of an atom and put it on a computer screen? That computer screen would be made up of thousands of pixels. Okay, the points that describe the shape of that atom would be fractions of a pixel. Okay, that's how small we're talking. Okay, so the star tetrahedrons that I'm asking you to consider this matrix to be made up of are tiny hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of a point on something that is a few millionths of the size of the planet. Okay, so a few billionths even. Vastly small, but don't be put off by the ridiculous insignificance of such small things, because exactly the same is reflected in the galaxies. What we see in a galaxy and a solar system are just simply fractal extrapolations from the shape of the atom. We're seeing exactly the same nodal frequency points. If you look at a galaxy, what you're seeing there is the shadow left of the exported energy field from the star tetrahedron that underlies the fundamental shape, and this is borne out by the relativistic distances in spatial objects and the relativistic sizes, that things like the size of a planet and the size and number of its moons are borne out within the mathematics of the star tetrahedron. The distance of the planets from the sun that they orbit and the size of the sun are relativistic proportions that are maintained throughout the star tetrahedron. So what we're seeing is you have to consider the kind of the star tetrahedron that underlies this as possibly being a hyperdimensional object beyond the three dimensions of length, width, height and time, into some implied dimension that we are not witness to. Certainly all of the scientists agree that there are more than four dimensions, the three dimensions of space and the one of time. Just a little point there, my personal experience of a herb called Salvia divinorum is the hyperdimensional herb. It facilitates the ability to experience the hyperdimension, the hyperverse, directly, and takes you to some very peculiar places. Right, okay, yes, there's a mathematical formula to the design, Paddy, and it's the Fibonacci sequence. If you go looking into sacred geometry, you'll find the Fibonacci sequence, which is a very simple mathematical sequence. It's basically 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, 5 plus 3 equals 8, and so it goes on. And when you look at near enough everything in nature, it responds and corresponds to this Fibonacci sequence. And what I'm suggesting is that what we're actually seeing with the complexity of the universe is the interaction of multiple Fibonacci sequence-driven fields engaging with each other and creating the complexity of interference patterns that present themselves as all life to us. If anybody wants to look into it, you'll find that the famous Leonardo da Vinci painting of the man with his arms outstretched and above his head and with his legs together and split out is actually drawn in two primary circles, and illustrates quite clearly how the entire shape of the human being is described by the star tetrahedron. It also, within the lines contained within that drawing, he also finds the line which describes the thickness of the cell wall. And this is fascinating because the cell wall wasn't discovered for at least 100 years after Da Vinci was working on that drawing. So he basically had the numbers there to construct the universe within the geometries of that particular drawing. Right, okay, yeah, golden ratio, phi, basically 1.1683. It's like pi that we're all taught at school, but this is the one that we're not taught, okay? Pi is 3.14. We use it for calculating the circumference of a circle from any given radius or diameter. With phi, it's a lot more subtle. Phi is the proportion that your sheet of A4 paper performs to. The height of a sheet of A4 paper is a direct phi relationship with its base. So it's 1.683. Sorry, 1.1683. Thank you, Pondy. I should know that because my mate Phil goes by the name of 1.1683 on Skype and on all the chat boxes. Okay, essentially this describes the ratio of all organic shapes. So our span, the distance between our fingers when our arms are outstretched, is a phi relationship to the overall height of our body. The length of our forearms is a relationship to the length of our overall arm length, the length of the components of our fingers. These are all direct phi ratios that hold up to within tenths of a percent of true to phi. Yes, it really does promote good health, and not only that, the concept of the morphogenetic field, this field that describes your natural cellular shape. The closer you can reflect your true morphogenetic field, stand up bloody straight, put your shoulders back, concentrate on your posture and keeping your body in the alignment that it was born to hold, and suddenly you'll find that your health will improve, your mood will improve, your general kind of sense of the universe will immediately brighten. So okay, Pondy, you know the bloody maths. Like I say, I came out of comprehensive school with, oh my God, like a D in English. I think my maths paper was laughed out of the room. Technical drawing, metalwork. I made it without going into the army or Ford, so that's something to be achieved from having gone through a fucking school like that. Fucking torn it down now, turned it into a bloody college, thank God. Right, we've got to grapple really with time. Time isn't as simple as we feel it. I was going into relativism. Alright, because time is relativistic to nearness to density, nearness to a dense object, and also the speed through time-space relativistically affects time. So to the point of the observer, the person travelling at light speed across the universe is aging much slower, or their clock would appear to be ticking much slower than the observer's clock, even if the two clocks were identical. This is the lensing, the distortion of time due to speed and density, mass and speed, basically. So here we have the E equals mc squared part of Einstein's equation. So essentially, we are in a rotating galaxy. That rotating galaxy is moving through time-space. Okay, we are heading in a collision course supposedly with, I believe it's the Alpha Centauri galaxy. But essentially, if you imagine the galaxy being like, say, a frisbee or some helicopter blades twirling their way on the top of the helicopter, and the helicopter has a forward motion through time-space. Now, the effect on the helicopter rotor blades is an interesting one. There's a reason why the Lynx helicopter currently still holds the world record, even after some 20-odd years, of about 246 miles an hour. And this is down to the speed of sound at the tip of the advancing blade being the limiting factor. Some clever blade design was all that managed to get them up that high, and nobody's really managed to replicate that since. I think they basically buy Lynx's brand of helicopter blades if they want to do something similar. Okay, so we have this advancing and retreating blade. Now let's consider this. The helicopter's moving forward. Let's use simple numbers. So let's say the helicopter's moving forward at 250 miles an hour. Okay, so we have an air speed, or in this case a time-space speed, of 250. Now, the helicopter rotor blade is spinning through the same air or the same time-space as the helicopter is advancing through. So the tip, as it circles the top of the helicopter, one blade is advancing and one blade is retreating. The advancing blade has, at its apogee, at its most tangential at 90 degrees to the helicopter, it has its own speed of rotation plus the entire forward motion of the helicopter as its speed through time-space or through air. The retreating blade has the speed of the helicopter forward through the air minus its own rotational speed at the point of apogee. Alright, okay, so essentially we have one rotor blade that is, let's say it's spinning at 500 miles an hour at the tip. Then at the 9 o'clock position, it will be travelling at 750 miles per hour. And at the 3 o'clock position, it will be travelling at 500 miles an hour minus 250, which would be 250 miles an hour. So you can see we've got a 500 mile an hour differential between the two blades. Now, because speed affects time, what we'll actually be seeing there, if we could see time like it was air, we would see that the density of time that one blade was having to move through would be much, much denser than the one that was retreating. And if we could actually imagine time like the air being corkscrewed out of the helicopter blades, then what we would actually see is a torus being formed, a toroidal field being formed above the helicopter rotor blade and below it, and that these would have counter-rotating spins. Now, if we imagine this air, this twisted toroidal air, to be the fabric of time-space, and that we consider that it's not uniform all over, and that at the centre of the rotor blades, the differential in time is almost negligible. Yeah, it's going at a constant speed of 250 miles an hour forwards. However, if you're out on the arm, if you're out on the tip of the blade, yeah, then what you're going to be experiencing is a rapid change, a rapid switchback from compressed time to expanded time. Now, if we apply this to our position about 2/3 of the way out on one of the spiral arms of the galaxy, and we know that these spiral arms are spinning, then when we're on the side of the spiral arm that's advancing Andromeda, that's advancing through time-space, we will be experiencing an entirely different density of time than when we're on the side of the galaxy that's retreating from the direction of travel through space. So essentially we have this bizarre situation where we have compressed and stretched fields of the time-space grid to consider, and that these twist into the most tortured toroidal effects. And this is what we see as forming. I mean, the stars at the centre of galaxies are known to travel at vast spin speeds, much faster than can possibly be explained by common Newtonian mechanics. But if you apply this sense of the time that they're experiencing is of a different nature, the time-space that those stars are operating in is of a fundamentally different nature to the time-space that we can measure and test here on Earth. And that this again is the point, that how would we know if we were travelling through a denser period of time-space? We as the observer on Earth, the clocks on our wall would still read a second for a second in our time, but as an external observer we could be being extruded like the toothpaste from a tube through a time lens and be experiencing vastly different gradations of time. And it's my suggestion that this cyclic ecliptic path that we travel to and fro and above and below the galactic equator will essentially pass us through two counter-rotating areas of time-space, from the northern equatorial regions to the southern equatorial regions, and, like I say, through an area of kind of intermediary space, in-between space, non-rotational space, with an intensely dense energy field being kind of squeezed from these two vortices out through the lateral plane of the galaxy and heading straight for us. And there's certainly some suggestion from the wisdom of the ancients, the reason why they would go and bury themselves in holes in the ground to go and meditate was because if you bury yourself in a hole in the ground, you exclude yourself from the general kind of electromagnetic chatter that the solar system throws at you, and instead your only influence is these highly energetic particles that travel straight through rock and out through the planet and out the other side within a whisker of a second, and that these are possibly responsible for triggering the spontaneous reactivation of your pineal gland during waking moments. So it's entirely possible, and I have heard it said, that these vast electromagnetic fields squashing these high-speed, low-energy, low-mass intergalactic particle streams into the region of space that we're going to be travelling through may well switch us all on. It may be like some prolonged fucking LSD trip or meditational trance. Time itself may become so distorted and plastic that we may find that we can achieve things that would be inconceivable. That it almost feels to me already like the approach of 2012 has ever got further away. It's almost like time itself has become so very plastic and elastic and stretched and contrived that the experience that we're all sharing at the moment is one of just enormous acceleration. But that if you put that acceleration on a time graph, on an XY graph, and then consider the time part of that XY graph to be an elastic dimension and stretch that graph out, suddenly you find a linearity. Where there's a bell curve, there becomes a straight line. So Paddy, began up as podcast, mate. I've been asked to stick this up as a podcast on the .weebly site. If anybody hasn't come across that yet, the TNS Radio, www.tnsradio.weebly.com is where all the lads' pods are going up. Right, where was I? You bloody distracting me now, Paddy. Give it a rest. Right, where was I? Right, okay, so yeah, we're going through this condensed period of area of time-space. and that this could very well potentially explain the explosion in accelerated development of humanity since the Industrial Revolution. We may even have seen this effect coming for thousands of years, possibly, you know what I mean? We're basically on a bell curve of star density, and we're reaching the point of apogee, the point at which we cross through the area of the galactic plane where the majority of stars are condensed around it. Something like 98% of all the stars in the galaxy are within this 2% narrow band that we're about to pass through. Again, 21st of December 2012, it's a lovely mystical date, probably not that accurate, about 75 years either side, but it doesn't matter. We are either approaching apogee or at apogee. And the glorious thing about this time is it may well be the great unravelling. The intimidation and totalitarianism that we have all seen and become dismayed at may well just unravel itself just as simply as it was constructed. That may be the great truth of December the 21st, 2012, that it may be the beginning of the great unravelling. Please don't let it become the great letdown because everybody expects fucking Jesus to turn up, or an asteroid storm, or Nibiru, or any of that bullshit. It may be something very much more subtle, something much more like the stroke of midnight, where you go from it becoming darker to it becoming lighter, and no more perceptible than that imperceptible change. But the moment of midnight is crucially important when you're considering a transition into the dawn. Okay, so this may be the dawning of the age of Aquarius, but it's fucking midnight. You know what I mean? We've got a long way to go yet, people, and we need to both accept change and become part of that change. I think if we're going to make any manifest changes in our reality, and that's possibly the most important lesson from this, is that with this, I haven't mentioned the fact that consciousness is involved in all of this. All quantum experiments have to exclude the experimenter, because the experimenter will affect the experiment by their observation. That's proven fact. So, alright, well, Vin, I hope you've enjoyed your vino, nursemaid in your missus. Lads, I hope you've enjoyed listening. I could go on with this psychobabble all night. My missus calls this my great mission of woo-woo, which I'm serving up to the population whether they like it or not. What should we go out with? Why is it that I always want to play something rude? Well, I've had loads of bloody copyright material on here today, so let's just see what we've got here. I actually fancy some Ian Jury. I don't know about you lot. Just got to bloody find it now, haven't I? Okay. Like I say, Paddy, I'll be chucking the pod up as soon as. Might be a day or two. Just gonna have to edit out all the music because it's not been non-copyright as my stuff normally is. Oh bloody hell! I can't find a thing now. What am I looking for? Oh, Ian Jury, that was it. All right, okay, I'll be a bit further up here. No, it'll be about that way if it's anywhere. Oh, bloody hell, typical. Not under eye. Go figure, it'll be a bloody 0 and a 1. Oh, for God's sakes. Alright, okay, well, let's stick something on, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. Alright, okay, let's have a bit more, I don't know. I'm going to play this one just because it's going to get right up people's noses. This is White Stripes Conquest. Anybody want to listen in again? Oh, I would love to play Billericay Dicky. I don't have it to hand. I'll try and dig that one out. This is White Stripes and Conquest. Turn down your speakers or unplug your headphones or something. I'll be back on at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the universe willing. My best wishes to Vin's missus. I hope she gets well. Can't manage on here without the boss. And thank you all for listening in for this marathon science lecture and the wonderful Lada. And John. Hopefully we'll be having those back on air soon. Alright folks, that's me done. It's freemanjack on TNS Radio for Vin, because he's busy being a nurse. And this is White Stripes Conquest.